Dr. Eliza Marlowe stood at the edge of the dense Congo jungle, the humid air pressing against her skin like a suffocating blanket. She wiped the sweat from her brow, her eyes scanning the thick foliage that seemed to swallow all light and sound. The villagers had tried to dissuade her with their tales of the Mokele-Mbembe, their voices quivering with fear and reverence. Yet the promise of discovery, the thrill of the unknown, pulled her forward. Eliza adjusted her backpack, feeling the weight of the equipment and provisions she carried. She was alone now. Her team, stricken by illness and superstition, had retreated back to the safety of civilization. She had sent them away, determined to continue the search on her own. The villagers' warnings echoed in her mind, but she pushed them aside, driven by an insatiable curiosity. The first steps into the jungle were like crossing a threshold into another world. The canopy overhead was so thick that it turned day into twilight, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. The air was alive with the hum of insects and the distant calls of unseen animals. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent her heart racing. As Eliza ventured deeper, the sounds of the jungle grew louder, more chaotic. The cacophony of life was both mesmerizing and disorienting. She paused to listen, her ears straining to pick up any unusual noises. It was then she heard it, the low, resonant hum that the villagers had described. It was unlike anything she had ever heard, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very earth and air, filling her with an inexplicable dread. It's just a natural sound, she told herself, trying to steady her nerves. Nothing to be afraid of. But as she pressed on, the hum grew louder, more insistent, and the jungle seemed to close in around her. The path she had been following became less distinct, the undergrowth thicker and more tangled. She checked her compass, but the needle spun uselessly, as if the very air was charged with some strange force. Hours passed, and the oppressive heat began to take its toll. Eliza stopped to rest, drinking from her canteen and wiping the sweat from her face. She looked around, trying to get her bearings, but every direction looked the same, an endless sea of green and shadow. As she resumed her journey, she came across signs of something large, moving through the jungle. Broken branches, deep gouges in the earth, and enormous footprints pressed into the mud. Her heart quickened, with a mixture of fear and excitement. She was close. Closer than anyone had ever been. But as night began to fall, the jungle took on a more sinister aspect. The sounds of the day gave way to a different kind of noise. Low growls, rustling leaves, and the ever-present hum that seemed to echo inside her very bones. She set up a small camp, lighting a fire to ward off the darkness. The flickering flames cast long shadows that danced and twisted, creating phantoms in the night. Lying in her tent, Eliza found sleep impossible. The hum was louder now, a constant oppressive presence that filled her with a sense of unease she couldn't shake. She closed her eyes, trying to calm her racing thoughts, but every sound seemed amplified, every rustle a potential threat. Her mind conjured images of the Mokele-Mbembe, the legendary creature that had brought her here. She imagined it lurking just beyond the firelight, watching her with ancient, predatory eyes. What if the villagers were right? The thought crept unbidden into her mind. What if there's something out there that shouldn't be disturbed? The night stretched on, endless and suffocating. Every sound, every shadow seemed to carry a hidden menace. Eliza clutched her flashlight, its beam a thin, fragile line of defense against the encroaching darkness. The jungle seemed to whisper around her, the hum a constant, oppressive drone that threatened to drive her mad. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the canopy, Eliza felt a glimmer of relief. She packed up her camp, determined to press on, but the night's terror had left its mark. She moved with a heightened sense of caution, her senses on high alert. The jungle was not just a place, it was a living, breathing entity, and Eliza could feel its presence all around her. It was as if the very air was watching, waiting. And as she moved forward, Driven by a mix of fear and determination, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that she had crossed a line into a world that was not meant for her. The jungle whispered its secrets, and Eliza Marlowe was about to discover that some things are better left undisturbed. The jungle seemed even more oppressive in the morning light. The dense foliage absorbed the sun's rays, casting a perpetual twilight over the landscape. Dr. Eliza Marlowe forged ahead, her mind a whirl of curiosity and apprehension. Each step took her deeper into the unknown, where the lines between reality and myth blurred. Eliza stopped to examine a peculiar set of markings on a tree. The bark was stripped away in long, jagged strokes, revealing pale wood beneath. These were no ordinary animal scratches. She carefully sketched the marks in her journal, her pulse quickening. Whatever had made these marks was large and powerful, capable of tearing through solid wood with ease. The day wore on, and the jungle's cacophony of sounds grew louder. Birds cawed overhead, unseen creatures rustled in the underbrush, and the ever-present hum seemed to grow more insistent. Eliza felt as though the very air was charged with a foreboding energy, a tangible sense of being watched. Around midday, she came upon a river, its waters dark and sluggish. The muddy banks were littered with the bones of small animals, picked clean and bleached by the sun. She knelt to fill her canteen, her eyes scanning the water's edge. It was then she noticed the tracks. Enormous, three-toed prints pressed deep into the mud, leading into the river. Her breath caught in her throat. The prints matched descriptions she had read in old explorers' journals, accounts of a creature that defied the known laws of nature. She traced the path of the tracks with her eyes, feeling a mixture of awe and dread. Eliza's reverie was broken by a sudden sharp crack of a branch snapping nearby. She froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Slowly she turned her head, scanning the dense undergrowth. The jungle was still, unnaturally so. Even the birds had fallen silent. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She could feel something watching her, hidden just beyond the veil of leaves. She strained her ears, trying to detect any sound. But there was nothing. Only the heavy silence and the insistent hum that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. With deliberate care, Eliza rose to her feet and began to back away from the river. She kept her movements slow and controlled, her eyes darting to every shadow and flicker of movement. Her mind raced with thoughts of the Mokele-Mbembe, the legendary beast that had drawn her into this forsaken jungle. As she retreated, the oppressive silence was shattered by a deep, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Eliza's blood ran cold. She turned and ran, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The jungle seemed to close in around her, branches snagging at her clothes and face. She didn't stop until she was sure she had put a good distance between herself and whatever had made that sound. Panting, she leaned against a tree, trying to calm her racing heart. She was lost again. The jungle's twisting paths all looking the same. The day dragged on in a haze of heat and fear. Eliza pressed forward, driven by a need to escape the oppressive feeling of being hunted. She stumbled upon an old, overgrown trail, half hidden by vines and undergrowth. It was a tenuous lifeline, but it was better than nothing. The trail led her to a clearing as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ground. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient, twisted tree, its gnarled branches reaching skyward like skeletal fingers. The air around it was thick with a sense of foreboding, a heavy weight that pressed down on her. Eliza approached the tree cautiously, drawn by a strange compulsion. She noticed carvings in the bark, symbols that looked like a blend of ancient runes and animal scratches. A sudden gust of wind rustled the leaves, and the hum grew louder, almost deafening. Eliza turned, her eyes wide with fear, as the shadows around her seemed to come alive. The jungle whispered, voices just beyond the edge of understanding, words that sent chills down her spine. In the failing light, she saw movement, a massive shape, low to the ground, slinking through the trees. Its eyes glinting with a predatory intelligence emerged from the shadows. It moved with a grace that belied its size, each step measured and deliberate. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She knew she couldn't outrun it. Her mind raced, searching for a way out. The creature's eyes locked onto hers, and she felt a primal fear that threatened to overwhelm her. It was as if the jungle itself had come alive, a living nightmare that had no intention of letting her go. She backed away, slowly, her hands trembling. The hum reached a fever pitch, and Eliza's vision blurred, the world around her spinning. She stumbled, falling to her knees, the ground seeming to give way beneath her. In a moment of desperation, she grabbed her flashlight and shone it directly at the creature. The beam cut through the twilight, illuminating the Mokele-Mbembe's massive scaled body. The creature recoiled, letting out a deafening roar that shook the very ground. Eliza scrambled to her feet and ran, not daring to look back. She heard the creature crashing through the jungle behind her, its roars echoing in her ears. The jungle seemed to conspire against her, every root and branch a potential trap. She burst through the underbrush and stumbled into another clearing. This one was different, filled with the remnants of old expeditions. Rusted equipment, tattered tents, and scattered bones told a grim story. Eliza's heart sank as she realized she had stumbled upon the remains of those who had come before her, lured by the same promises and legends. The hum was deafening now, a relentless pulse that seemed to emanate from the very earth. Eliza fell to her knees, clutching her head, trying to drown out the noise. The jungle closed in around her, the shadows twisting and writhing. In her final moments, she looked up to see the Mokele-Mbembe standing over her, its eyes filled with a cold, ancient intelligence. The creature let out one final roar, and the world went dark.